Hi everybody, Ian Bremmer here. I've got your world in more than 60 seconds. That's right, as long as coronavirus is with us, and it certainly is with us for a while, I'm giving you more than 60 seconds. It's my way of giving back, showing you that I care, all those sorts of things. Not all that hard to lift, really. Let's start with your questions. Number one, the DNC is underway, the Democratic National Convention. How do you think the first night went? Well, it's weird, right? Because it's virtual. But the fact that it's virtual means that everybody gets to practice their speeches and get the cinematic quality right before it actually goes out. So, I mean, you know, when you've got a whole bunch of money and you've got Hollywood sensibilities advising you, you can make it look really good. And that's what they did. So, I mean, I do think it was entertaining. It was engaging. I think from a more meaningful, substantive perspective, it is pretty clear that you have a broader tent that is focused on getting Trump out of office. Now, I mean, the other side of that is that Biden is not driving the train, right? I mean, there's not an immense amount of enthusiasm about the actual candidate. And Kamala Harris certainly helps, but ultimately Biden is the presidential candidate, and you know he's not going to inspire the way that Obama did or Michelle Obama did last night. But certainly, I don't think you're going to have Bernie Sanders delegates, opposing Biden the way many did during 2016 when I was at both the Democratic and Republican national conventions then. And it was quite something to see just the dissonance inside what was not one happy tent. Here, you've got a lot of people that are very motivated because everyone's angry with Trump. And I think with Kasich as well, who I know pretty well. And I mean, he's an older guy from Ohio, and it's an important swing state. But ultimately, I don't think Kasich is the person that swings more people to vote for Trump. It's just that there are also, in addition to the Bernie Sanders people being really anti-Trump, there are a number of disenfranchised Republicans that are opposed to Trump too. So I think all of that, certainly hurts. And I also think it's true that, Trump has criticized the fact that, well, they did these takes at different times. So, some people said 150,000, 160,000, 170,000 dead. In other words, they've been done over the last 2 weeks. True. But I mean, the fact is that the biggest crisis of my lifetime is happening right now. And, President Trump didn't ask for that. It's not his fault that that's when it happened, but he's got the bag. And how he is seen to respond to that crisis is a big piece of whether people are or are not going to vote for him. And, the fact that that is 170,000 deaths and counting right now, and the U.S. economy is hurting right now, is a real uphill lift. And I've seen a lot of people saying, well, if it wasn't for coronavirus, the economy would be doing really well. And, what would the Democrats have to run on? Sure, but of course you're going to run on the biggest crisis that we've felt in our lifetimes. And Trump's direct leadership of that crisis has been lacking. And I think that's why Michelle Obama's speech was so powerful. It's not that everyone in the world loves Michelle. It's that she focused on the fact that Trump is not handling the crisis very well. This idea that, it is what it is. That line was so damning because it was Trump's response to all of the people that have died on coronavirus, while he's president. So that's where I think the DNC is. It's virtual. It's a lot of people are watching it. I guess it's giving enthusiasm. I don't think it's going to give that much of a bump to Biden. And by the way, I do think that the numbers are going to get tighter between Biden and Trump as we get close to elections. Why? Because coronavirus numbers are coming down and hopefully will continue to come down as we learn more about it and as there is more social distancing and more mask wearing and the rest, and also because the economy is going to continue to rebound. So I wouldn't be complacent if I was a Democrat right now. Okay, what is going on in New Zealand? Well, President Trump said that there is a new outbreak in a big surge in New Zealand, which is true. It's 9 people. And that is a big surge for New Zealand because they had no cases for 100 days in the whole country, and they had gotten back to normal. I mean, gyms, sporting events, nightclubs, you name it. Can't do that now. Auckland is the capital, basically, Auckland, the biggest city in New Zealand, not the capital, is under lockdown right now. And that's because they don't want to have spiraling cases. That's pretty impressive. It also means that they are delaying their national elections for 4 weeks, which is perfectly legal for them to do. And it's because they want to make sure that they have as much control over this virus as they possibly can. There is very little to learn from New Zealand for the United States. They are an isolated country with relatively small population. It's not dense, densely populated. The one thing you can learn is that taking a pandemic seriously and leading with science and experts is a generally smart thing to do. But aside from that, I wouldn't say very much. With China's vice grip over Hong Kong tightening, who's writing this stuff? Who's asking that question? Will the U.S. recognize Taiwan's sovereignty? No, I don't think so. The U.S. has an ambiguous position on Taiwanese sovereignty. It does not recognize China's position, but also does not formally recognize Taiwanese sovereignty. It is certainly moving more in that direction with the recent decision to send Cabinet Secretary Azar, Health and Human Services, to Taiwan. I would say that is moving up to a Chinese red line, but not actually crossing it. My sense from the Trump administration is that they don't want to actually cross red lines in the coming weeks because they don't want a crisis with the Chinese. They just want to continue to show they're the toughest out there. Having said that, that's what the advisors are saying. What President Trump actually does, is at the end of the day up to him. But I'd be really surprised if they move on this. Taiwan's never been a significant issue for President Trump himself. And Pompeo, the Secretary of State, knows what those red lines are. Finally, will Russia intervene in Belarus? This is a big and open question, and I don't think they will. We do see Russian troops moving up to the Belarus border. And keep in mind, Belarus is connected to Russia, but otherwise borders on NATO states, the Baltics and Poland. And the Russians have claimed that there is the potential for external intervention and warned countries, and said this with Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, warned them against external intervention, and that the Russians said they would intercede if there was external intervention. So I think what Putin is doing is basically showing the international community that Belarus is still going to be under Russian influence. And by the way, the Belarusian people who hate Lukashenko, the president, have no problem with a continued political alignment towards Russia. But Putin is also making it clear to Lukashenko that he's not intending to intervene. Russian state media is focusing a great deal on the demonstrations. Putin has said very little about Lukashenko and the domestic situation in Belarus itself. This reminds me very much of 2 years ago with Armenia, when the Russians allowed a colored revolution, a velvet revolution, to remove a kleptocratic government and bring in a prime minister who was anti-corrupt, but still Armenia very aligned towards Russia for military purposes, for economic and trading purposes, and otherwise. And I think that is the case with Belarus. If the Russians were to militarily intervene to prop up an incredibly unpopular and very incompetent Lukashenko government, they would end up with lots of Belarusians directly opposing them. And for that reason, I'd be very surprised if Putin intervenes militarily. That does mean it is more likely that Lukashenko is forced out. But so far, the military forces in Belarus have been supporting him. And until we see significant breaches there, the potential for more violence is quite significant. So, I mean, frankly, if the Russians were to intervene, I think they would actually squeeze politically and economically Lukashenko to leave if it looks like he really is at his last thread and he's starting to use violence, allowing him to get out of the country and giving him a place of exile. but facilitating a new Belarusian government that ultimately would more reflect the interests of the people, but would have a good relationship with Russia. That's where I think we're going, a bright spot in otherwise a pretty gloomy geopolitical outlook. Hope everyone's doing well, and avoid people. Be good.